So hello everyone, as Celia said, I'm a senior UI designer at Creative Assembly. So thank you for having me again on the Games UX Summit. Last year it was amazing, so it's a privilege to be here. So today I'm actually representing two companies. I would like to say thank you to Mediatonic and Creative Assembly for allowing me to present. The idea for this talk came to me when I was still at Mediatonic, and I'm going to be referencing lots of Gears Pop throughout the presentation. So yeah, massive thank you. And this presentation would not have happened without the help of experts. They share their knowledge with me, they answer lots of questions. So translators, producer, type designers, localization managers, and fellow UI designers. I joined Gears Pop a week before the soft launch, and I was working on it until the content lock in July this year. I spent most of my time designing feature, but most rewarding time was actually bug fixing and polish time. Not many people like this phase. I personally think it's great because it's a time of learning and validation of your design and implementation. It was during that phase of plowing through the localization bugs that this one thought kept coming back. I wish I knew it earlier, it would save me so much work. And I particularly vividly remember the moment of preparing promotional images for the App Store in 14 languages. That was the moment when the gates of questions opened. I worked on localized titles before, but I have never dived into subject so much. And yeah, I just got really hooked up on the project, and I would like to share my findings with you. So why localize? Well, obviously you want to reach as broad audience as possible. You want to increase the lifespan of the game. You want to increase revenues and downloads, and maybe communication, it's at the core of your game design. In any of those cases, you need to be able to speak players' language. So the language distribution looks like this across the world. So Chinese is the largest language when counting only native speakers. Spanish is the second, and English is the third. When factoring in the second, third, and the higher language speakers, so no natives, English is the largest language in the world. So in short, it means that there is a high chance that for your players, English is going to be a second language. Over 4.3 billion people were active users on the internet as of July this year, which encompasses about 56% of global population. Those are the 10 top languages of internet. So states, China and India rank ahead of all other countries in terms of the internet usage. But what about the games? Well, only 27% of the game consumer market is English speaking. Some of the largest of the segments are speakers of Japanese, Korean, Russian, French, Italian, German, and Spanish. The Chinese online and mobile game market is valued at over £22 billion. So it's clear that there is a massive financial incentive to do localization right. So how to take anything global? Is localization as simple as having the words translated? There is a proven process of taking any product global, from cars to websites. And this process includes two essential stages: internationalization and localization. So just let's have a look at the terms. Internationalization is the design and development of the product or application or a game so that can be adapted for any country or any market with the minimal re-engineering work. Localization is the process of modifying that product for a specific locale, which may be a country, a region, or some unique demographic. The goal of internationalization is to make localization easier, while localization focuses on a specific target market at the time. Internationalization is about setting up the core process, and localization handles the details. The two complement one another. The better job you do at internationalizing your product, the fewer problems you will have when localizing your product. So these days, there's often talk of culturalization, which is localization so effective that the players cannot really tell that the game has been localized for them. The game just simply belongs into the market, into the region. This can mean some serious work on the part of a translation company. There is also one more term worth knowing, which is transcreation, which is creative translation. This is a delicate line between translation and content creation. So let's, oh, sorry, I went a bit off head. Oh my God, sorry, I've lost the... So in terms of localization, game localization, what that means and what can mean for the games is, for example, adjusting the idioms and slang to fit the cultural references, changing historical and cultural references. It can also mean some serious changes like re-recording the audio or dialogue or soundtrack. It can mean cutting the whole plot lines and scenes from the game. It can mean adjusting the content to be compliant with the rules and laws. It can mean adjusting the gameplay, or it can mean changing the interface design. So here's the homepage of Gears Pop. And I would like to start talking about interface from script and typography, a graphic representation of words. This is where I spent considerable amount of my time and when it all really started for me. So as you can see, something as simple as changing the language setting in your game can really affect your ability to capture the original feel of the UI and typography. What makes those screens different? Let's break it down. And the first thing I want to talk about is the versus header and its length. So if there's only one thing that you're gonna take away from this talk today, it's this one. When you're going global, you need to be flexible and you need to be mindful of the text expansion and contraction. So English has very tight patterns, and if you design only in English, that might mean that there's not enough room built into your design. The general message is that the text will normally expand, and the smaller the source message, the higher the likely translation length. Of course, this is not true for every string and every message, but the issue tend to crop up in the least desirable places, like for example, headers. Just notice how making the header fit into the text box makes it lose the impact on the page. Also, the small UI elements are a bit of a pain. So tags and progress bars, the text becomes not legible or overflows at an alarming rate. So there is no easy formula to follow when it comes to expansion, because the percentage can change significantly even within a single pair of the languages. Technical translation and legal text tend to be shorter. Translating from English into languages such as Spanish or French can result in 20 to 25% of expansion, while German may expand as much as 35%. On the other hand, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese will usually contract, although the percentage may fluctuate significantly. In addition to unpredictability of the numbers of the characters resulting from translation, there are also other factors to complicate matter. So compound nouns, character width, character line, and height. A number of languages, such as Finnish, German, and Dutch, create a single large word to replace a sequence of shorter ones in other languages. The English text can easily be wrapped on 2 lines, where there is restricted width available. The German may not wrap automatically, and this may cause the challenge for your layout. So you need to pay particular attention to form entry, tabs, buttons, and narrow columns. Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, amongst other, are scripts that typically have more complicated characters than those in the Latin scripts. This can mean that even the number of the characters, when it's smaller, remains, or when it's small or remains the same, the horizontal space required may be much larger. It's also very common for not Latin scripts to have a taller characters, taller glyph, because of the complexity of the characters, and also used more line height between the lines of the text. So to design interface for a global market, there's a few things to be mindful of. So white space is your friend. Leave ample of white space, so the text will not appear crowded as it expands. When creating tables, do not make your columns too narrow. Be really wary of using too many abbreviations. Text that can be abbreviated in English may need to be written out in your target language, and this will cause the length of expansion to grow. This is more in design tip, but always link your text frames. The more flexibility you can allow for reflowing of the text, the easier it will get into managing the design. Functional tables and tooltips are always a good idea. It's easier to accommodate expanding text, and especially crucial on the small screens. Use well-defined characters and paragraph styles and use them consistently. Consider Japanese, Chinese, and Korean characters. They tend to group entire words in one character, sometimes more. Characters are also more visually complex, meaning they need to appear larger than English font in order to be easily read. And this alone can alter the look of your page. If possible, do not embed text tightly into your compositions. The translated text may not work with the image as you originally intended. And do not embed the text into your graphics. Be prepared to provide original files, but also this will prevent auditory devices and accessibility features on your phone to read the text in images. So the expansion does not affect only the written word, it also impacts the rate of spoken dialogue. So some languages take longer to speak because they have a higher word count. Some words, in certain languages, just have more syllables within the words, so it just takes longer to pronounce. This is something to consider if you're translating subtitles or voiceovers. If your subtitles grow by 30%, it becomes harder for viewers to read and absorb the text at the pace that was established by an English-speaking narrator. It helps to have your narrator speak a bit more slowly and leave the longer pauses between the sentences so the subtitles and the reader can catch up. So I would like to use this opportunity to direct you to those resources, Games Accessibility Guidelines, article by Ian Hamilton on the Gamma Sutra, and Ofcom Access Services Code for the best practices when it comes to making subtitles accessible. So those are the things to consider when dealing with a text expansion. But let's go back to the example of the homepage and explore font and font materials. So translated battle text failed to capture the original styling effect. The characters are not bold and the strokes seem to be slightly off. So when designing, you need to have a plan with your engineers how you're going to approach localization. Will you be able to maintain the weights and different typefaces? Or like in case of the gears, you will only use one typeface across the whole game in localized version. So will the typeface have the same behavior and the same treatment? Will you be able to maintain drop shadow, outlines, gradients, and bevels? So something to think about when creating and designing the static font materials in Unity in TextMesh Pro is how you pack the texture. So Latin characters take considerably less space on the texture sheet than in a logographic script, and texture size will affect styling effects. Korean, for example, has over 11,000 characters. If you try to render out Korean font at the same level of the detail as Latin, you would need to have a gigantic texture. So there are two consequences for this. You're probably only going to have one Korean font, so make sure it's versatile. And TextMesh Pro relies on the large gaps between the characters, so effects like outlines might not be achievable in localized version. So as I've mentioned, we have only one typeface in localized version of the game. So this decision was made quite late into the project and caused interesting bugs. One of them was that numbers, which are supposed to be the easiest to localize, cause a lot of issue across the whole game. So you can see, this is the same height of the glyph, but they're considerably wider. So lots of work into editing file fonts themselves to fix the issue across the whole game rather than going into every single scene and prefab and adjusting text boxes. So if you look at the type closely, you will also notice that it feels differently. And this is very interesting from the point of view of the brand expression. So if you're lucky, you had loads of time to research your favorite font that expresses the game perfectly. But then what happens if you didn't know about localization plans? Maybe the font that you have chosen doesn't cover the required language. So in this case, what you might want to try to do is to look at font pairing. So if you're not sure about font pairing, ask the type designer. They think about it a lot. But if you need to look for yourself, you don't need to know the language or technical aspects of typography. What you want to find is basically the similar font. So you're looking at the form of the typeface itself. So look at the variation between the thick and thin lines, compression of the typeface, pay attention to the rhythm as well. If you want to know more about what makes a good global font and about font pairing, I highly recommend Monotype resources and Adobe Max Conference for videos. So if you're curious about language support of your font that you already have, there's lots of tools online from the foundries. So you can find one of them under this link. You can basically drop your font and it tells you what languages it covers. It's quite useful. If you're designing for a global audience, be really aware of low quality typefaces. I know that typefaces can be really expensive and the licensing is really complicated, but it's actually quite a big undertaking. It's hard skill to master and a lengthy process. And just to give you an idea, designing a Latin font with 3 weights for 2 people, it's designing, then engineering, then testing, takes between 3 to 4 months. If we think about Arabic, it's between 4 and 6. But if we think about Chinese or Japanese fonts, and that's only 1 weight, it might take up to 18 months. What you're also looking for, it's type that is going to be supported. So when there's any issues on the way, you can contact the type designers and they can fix it. So to help you with the design process, you might want to consider something called pseudo-localization. It's just basically a fake translation. So this process should be fully functional at least a couple of months before the localization QA. But ideally, it should start as soon as you start entering the English strings into the game. A pseudo-localization is formed by a prefix of special characters, and that depends on the expansion rate of the language, and then the source text. So for example, if the source text reads battle, that's 6 characters, you add 2 or 3, and then you discover that the font that you have chosen doesn't support those characters. So you choose another one, and the version will be looking like this, so the third. Last one. So if the studio does not support this fake translation, what you might want to do is actually add those characters, special characters, at the stage of design, and then put the letters in the capital letters and add special characters like acutes and umlauts. And that will test not only height, but also a width. So it's common for designers to move different UI elements around to see which layout works the best. But be extra careful when doing that. If you try to form sentences by combining text and buttons, and boxes and drop-down menus, this will cause lots of trouble. Few reasons for this. Well, languages have different ways of ordering words. So in English, you have also one singular form and one plural form for each noun. But in Russian or Polish, there are 3. Some languages have gender-specific forms for nouns and adjectives, like French, for example. So if you place the drop-down menu in a sentence, you're risking a grammatical error. So Prison Architect, Gears Pop, the games that I've worked on, they all have accounts from a different source linked into the game. So for example, a publisher. And if you are designing a cross-platform game, it's most likely that you will need to design a login or account page or pop-up. I wanted to point you out to the one element that you should be really mindful of, which are the names and surnames input fields. So in red, you can see something which is in English called last name. This is actually a very complicated subject. When you're designing, you should ask yourself whether you really need to have a separate fields for given name and a family name. Maybe you can use only the name as user provides it. So bear in mind that the names in some cultures can be quite a lot of longer than your own. And so make input fields long enough to enter long names and ensure that if this name appears somewhere in the game, you leave enough space for it. So large majority of names don't use Latin alphabet, and those that do use accents and special characters as well. So remember that even names in English have special characters, so you need to pack your texture accordingly or use dynamic fonts. Also, what you need to consider is if you're designing the English version of the form, if you want the players to put a Latin transcription of their name or the original or both. So in early 1980s, Apple introduced the graphical user interface, and more than 30 years later, we still left with some of those icons, like for example, trash can. There's no question, iconography helps with general usability, but no icons are equally user-friendly, and nor do all icons travel equally global very well. So for example, a light bulb icon as a symbol of a new idea will not travel very well outside the Western world. Similarly, a rice bowl icon as a symbol of energy does not mean anything to Westerners. So to develop global icons, avoid hand gestures, they can be really risky. Arrows are often used to point the way forward, but what happens if you create an interface for right to left languages? What is the color and shape of the mailbox? To signify mail, we use an envelope rather than the mailbox. Mailboxes are different shapes and different colors, so be really aware of the cultural context and test your visuals. So avoid using flag as a navigation aid. Flags can create problems, often unintentionally. They used to indicate language, but many countries have more than one official language and many more unofficial languages. There is also a political aspect, so for example, a flag of Taiwan and China. Flag limits the global reach, which English is the most popular. And also, finally, they do not scale very well. So in terms of the language options, choose an endonym to describe the language, so not Spanish, but Espanol. This might seem like a minor detail, but it often sheds a light on a larger issue, the inability to see region or country throughout the eyes of the residents. So body language is loaded with the cultural meaning and often can send conflicting cultural messages. So consider those gestures. So V for victory or peace, turn the palm inside, in the UK it's quite offensive gesture. Thumbs up has evolved to be very positive throughout the North America. However, in the most of Middle East and parts of Africa, this gesture could be quite vulgar. In Japan, it's considered to be a fifth digit. While OK signifies all is well, in other countries, it might mean zero or nothing, or again, could be quite vulgar. If you put the feet on a table in the Middle East and show the soles of your foot, this is really offensive for your host. And applause emoji has a very sexual connotation in China. So you cannot know every single gesture in every single country, but you really need to test your visuals with the local experts to avoid unintentional faux pas, like for example this one in Mario Kart. So colors have a significant cultural, political, and personal meaning. So black signifies death in most of the European countries. In certain contexts, it might mean sophistication. In Africa, black conveys age and wisdom. For us, white is synonymous with purity and justice, but it can signify death across much of the Asia. Blue is probably the safest color across the globe. Most countries perceive it positively. Red, super interesting from the point of view user interface, conveys passion and excitement, but it can also be perceived negatively as danger or bleeding. On stock markets, the symbol is used to signify loss. Ironically, across most of the Asia, red is considered to be a lucky color, symbol of good fortune. The Chinese stock market uses the color red to signify that the stock has gone up in value, not down. Green is globally associated with environmental issues, the military, the color of money. It's holy in Muslim countries. In China, green is used to signify loss in stocks. Purple is widely associated with royalty and spirituality around the globe, but across much of the Latin America, it signifies death. So let's consider the direction in which the words are read. By the time we are adults, this sense of right to left and left to right is really fixed within us, with our directional bias affecting how we perceive the world, how we portray it, and even how we expect things like websites and electronics to work. So there was a study conducted in which participants were asked to draw a football player, and in Italy, sketches came out like this. In the Middle East, they came out like this, and the results of speakers of two languages were split in the middle. So a football goal is considered to be more elegant and the act of aggression more forceful when the actor moves from left to right. In advertising, cars are usually shown facing the right, and in research, participants always take them as more desirable. People who look towards the right are perceived as more powerful. For the Arab and the Hebrew speakers, the pattern is completely reversed. So years of experience with the text determine the ways in which we expect actions to unfold. What does that mean for the interface? Well, the basic patterns of usability and utility may be different than you expect. So where do you go to find the menu? On and off button. For languages that are read from right to left, UI should be mirrored to ensure the content is easy to understand. And for more depth explanation, I highly recommend the Material Design Guidelines. So if you are UI designers, sometimes in February this year, you might have experienced the panic attack when the new foldable phones were announced. Maybe you spent a considerable amount of time making sure that your UI works across new phones with really irritatingly inconsistent notches. But actually, what might be beneficial is to take a step back and think about low-end devices and slower networks. So network access is very much like the future. It may touch all parts of the globe, but not equally. In most markets around the world, slower 3G network will still dominate. In a slow wireless network, the difference in the user experience can be really significant. So to wrap up, start planning early. Tom Foley told me that this is a really common issue across all the industries. So loads of people fail to ask questions from the beginning. What are your plans for localization? How do you want to approach this? How are you going to maintain the consistency and readability, look and feel of the brand? Christiana from CA, she pointed out that the awareness of localization is crucial at the very beginning of the process. She and her team quite often goes to designers and speak about the implications of gender cases and other languages in terms of design and design systems. Communication is a key component of successful localization. It goes in all directions within the team. So producers and product managers need to communicate requirements to dev so they can make a really informed decision for the project. And designers need to communicate with localization changes to the localization team, especially on the final stages of the project. So give yourself a time. It's important to understand local sensitivities, and if you like learning, this is going to be a hugely enjoyable process. And give your localization partners enough time. There are creatives like us, they really want to do the best job as possible, but quite often they work under tight deadlines and with really old-fashioned technology. They work from a spreadsheets without any visuals and additional information. So you need to allow them time for asking questions, feedback, and then obviously testing. So test your game throughout, switch the language settings. This is not only beneficial from localization point of view, but also from general usability. Does your game work so well if you don't have a text that supports the navigation? Also, Christiana pointed out quite interesting fact. So lots of QA testers, they only concentrate on the text. So allow them to feedback on a wider experience of the game. So design feedback forms that can fill after every play session. And finally, thinking locally requires seeing the world and the game throughout the player's eyes. So we are creating entertainment, and we need to make sure that people, first of all, can use it and that they can enjoy it. And there is no space for the half job with the amount of competition that is out there. So sometimes a simple change in the worldview can go a long way. So instead of thinking of players as foreign, maybe try international instead. The sooner the players become local, the closer you'll be into succeeding. And by viewing every country and culture on equal terms, you will maintain a better degree and respect and support for all players, the present and the future. Here's the recruitment slide. Thank you very much.
Okay, do we have questions in the audience? Over there. All right, where's the... Oh, God. What?
So we just kill the time. And there's one fun fact. I have dual nationality. I speak 2 languages, but I have never designed interface in Polish. It's quite sad.
I was just wondering, have you ever designed a UI for a game with a right-to-left reading language?
So this is a sad thing as well. No, I haven't, and I've really struggled to finding a good example. So I've asked Rami, I'm not sure if you've seen his talk, I highly recommend, GDC, about support for Arabic countries in testing, and he pointed out that FIFA is a really good example of that.
Okay, thanks.
Right now, we just launched Sky globally. We are suffering a lot of things you're talking about. So it was quite eye-opening to see the expert here talking about how to make this thing better. One thing that we run into, up till now, we don't really know how to solve is we actually have chat. So people around the world, they chat in their own language. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're using the Noto San, so it does allow more language to be supported. What happened is our company is quite international, so we have Japanese developers. They were like, this font of Japanese looks like shit, so we have to replace this font. And so we made a special Japanese font just for Japan player.
Oh, wow.
And then what happened is a lot of Japanese players can type English, Japanese, and Chinese, and they would just be speaking all 3 languages simultaneously in the chat. But the Japanese font we support don't have enough Chinese characters. So many of the Japan player was like, how come I can't type these words? How come I couldn't do that? You know, how come my Chinese player just say hello, I couldn't see the words? And till this point, we still don't know what would be a best solution because we really felt like the font for Japanese is so important to capture that feeling, right? But then there's no font in this world right now can support cross-language display, and we're still kind of getting stuck right now. We don't know what to do in this particular case.
So there's a few things that come to my mind when I listen about that. So yes, it's hard to create the one font for every single languages, and from various reasons. Google launched Noto project, the font that we've used, which aims to support every single language in the world. So using one family might be the option. Also, Unity, I think, started to work on support of dynamic languages, but it's still not in, and is a long way from being perfect. If I can recommend additional information, there is amazing talk from Games of War developers who did this sort of translation on the go with their chat. So it might be worth asking them how they went about it. But it's, yeah, we're waiting for dynamic fonts, and I'm waiting for them as well.
Sorry, you're going to stop here because we have the break. Sorry, I just saw that there were some questions in there. It doesn't seem to refresh always very well, so apologies for those who tried to ask questions there, but we have to break now, so feel free to go and see Joanna
Oh, yeah, definitely.
during the break.